An exciting development of the last decade is the emergence of private enterprise and a commercial sector for space travel. It's still very early days, but we can see the outlines of what might be possible. As of this date, just 7 space tourists have been launched. They are all extremely wealthy people. Dennis Tito, for example, paid $35 million for a spacewalk on top of his spaceflight to the International Space Station. This is not obviously an activity available to the many, but it's early days. The genesis of the commercial space activity dates back to the XPrize. The XPrize was a clever idea designed to spur innovation, modeled on the prize that Charles Lindbergh won for his first flight across the Atlantic. A private consortium offered $10 million to the first spacecraft or airplane that could go to 100 kilometers altitude twice within a 1-week period. 100 kilometers is not technically space, but at that altitude the sky would indeed appear dark. It's the formal definition of space, and of course it's well short of low Earth orbit, which is several times higher. Burt Rutan designed Spaceship One, and Spaceship One won the XPrize, kicking off a wave of innovation in the design of spacecraft. The particular goal of this innovation is for reusable spacecraft, because part of the large cost of space travel involves the fact that the rocket equation dictates that 90% of the weight of any spacecraft will be in fuel. After the success of Spaceship One, billionaire investor Richard Branson teamed up with Burt Rutan to form Virgin Galactic. This private space company has the goal of taking tourists to 100 kilometers for joyrides in space at a cost of about $250,000 a head. So far, over 700 people have signed up. The spaceship designed to do this, Spaceship Two, had a catastrophic failure, with the death of one pilot and the severe injury of another, in 2014, and it's not clear when the first paying flights in Spaceship Two will be. Regardless of the bumps in the road, and we can remember how many people were killed in the early days of civil aviation, it seems that the private space activity will continue. There are 11 private space companies, and growing, many of them planning low Earth orbit tourism, some of them planning orbital hotels, and a couple even planning joyrides to the moon, although not lunar landings. This sector is growing very rapidly, even though revenues have not appeared yet. As another example of entrepreneurial activity to fuel the space enterprise is the Google Lunar XPrize. The search engine giant is offering a prize of $30 million to any team, not government, but funded privately or through a university or research institute, that can land a rover on the moon, travel between 2 points, and send back data or images. Currently, over 15 teams are still in the running for this prize. As with the XPrize itself, the Lunar XPrize is small compared to the development and research costs required to win the prize. This was the case with the original XPrize, to Charles Lindbergh. The innovation is spurred by competition. The key to these new space enterprises are reusable space vehicles. Remember that the Apollo spacecraft sitting atop the Saturn V rocket involved 95% of the mass and fuel, and these rockets were lost or jettisoned as the object went into its Earth orbit. The space shuttle was partly reusable, but also had enormous costs of hundreds of millions of dollars per launch. Spaceship Two and others like it are planning to be completely reusable, typically using an air-breathing technology to get to very high altitude and then a rocket to do the last part of the job, with both parts returning to Earth to be reused. Spaceport America in New Mexico has grown and has many tenants hoping to be part of this new space activity. Another major player in the commercial space sector is SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk, the billionaire investor, best known for PayPal. Musk is interested in pushing transport in all areas. He's also the founder of the Tesla car company. SpaceX is rethinking the rocket equation and designing its rockets from scratch, trying to get more propulsion and reusability out of a smaller payload. SpaceX has already resupplied the space station several times, given that the space shuttle no longer flies. And SpaceX has a multi-billion-dollar contract with NASA to do this. It's developing the Falcon heavy lift capability, which will take shuttle-level payloads into Earth orbit. It's also developing the Grasshopper rocket, which will be fully reusable. Surveys over the last 30 years show that there's a viable economic model for space travel based on tourism. Surveys of the general public show that the likely revenues from a space tourist activity, of course, depend on the price point, but annual revenues of $30 or $40 billion are not out of question. If we make the analogy to entertainment, here is a graph of the mean cost of a movie and a space mission over the last few decades. Innovations in rocketry and propulsion have led to cheaper and smaller space missions, so that cost has come down, although it's risen recently. Movies, however, have become more and more expensive. It's now routine to have a movie that costs more than a space mission. Perhaps the best example is Avatar, a movie by James Cameron about life on an exomoon, which cost about the same amount, $400 million, as the Kepler mission, which actually discovered exoplanets. Perhaps the best analogy to where we sit in the history of space travel is with the development of the Internet. Taking the 30,000-foot view, we can see that the early phase of the Internet involved entrepreneurs and pioneers, visionaries who could imagine things that would have been difficult to imagine from everyday life then. The visionary of the Internet is someone unknown to most people, J.R. Licklider. Back in the 1960s, he envisaged wireless Internet, data in the cloud, and essentially the entirety of our digital lives. Remember, this was when a computer filled the size of a suburban home. The incubation period for the Internet occurred in the military-industrial complex. The very first Internet emerged from DARPA, which was a defense agency subcontractor, and most Internet and email was first done within government agencies and national labs. The R&D phase of the Internet occurred in government labs and universities around the country. The public was dimly aware of the capabilities of the Internet until the early 1990s. The floodgates opened in the 1990s when the American government deregulated the emergent Internet, and the big commerce entities like Amazon and Google were first founded. Flash forward 2 decades, and the entire Internet is dominated by these leviathans, whose price tags run $100 billion. However, it's important to realize that innovation of the Internet still occurs in government labs and universities around the world, pushing those capabilities, and that eventually works its way into the commercial sector. If we hold with this analogy, we can see similarities. Space travel, or rocketry, also had a visionary phase. In the early 1920s, Goddard was the only person in the world experimenting with rockets, and the first flight of Goddard's rocket was as unimpressive as the first flight of the Wright brothers in an airplane some decades earlier. But he was sowing the seeds for greater things. The incubation in the military-industrial complex happened after the Second War. NASA brought back German rocket scientists, in particular Wernher von Braun, who developed the V-2 rocket later stages of the Second World War, and deployed that same technology in the budding space enterprise in the United States. Through the 1970s and 1980s, space travel was the exclusive preserve of governments, in particular the United States and Russia. However, research was going on, and space astronomy and planetary science prospered due to government funding. If this analogy holds, the present day corresponds to the mid-1990s with the Internet, when Google, Amazon, Facebook, and others were just beginning to emerge as concepts. We can look at the private space sector now, at Virgin Galactic, at Elon Musk's SpaceX, and wonder which of these will turn into the Google of space travel in the future. It's very hard to predict winners and losers, but it's safe to predict that this activity will grow in the next decade. Meanwhile, the death of 14 astronauts in 2 space shuttles and the loss of other life in this private space industry reminds us that space is dangerous, and there have been many hazards along the way.
On the Z1 truss.
A little bit more. Discovery. Houston for EVA. Wondering if Beamer is more than a few arms reaches away from Sunny. I'm on the equipment lock right now, Bill. If you want me to go over to lab, I can do that.
Bill, I've got the feather all with me.
Sunny, your camera is behind you. I hope it's tethered because it looks like it's passing underneath of the arm end effector.
It's not. It came off of the bracket. The bracket bolts came undone.
Okay, we see that.
It was an extraordinary sensation. I had never felt quite like it before. I was free above the planet Earth, and I saw it was rotating majestically below me.
Perhaps the most notable way that space travel has permeated the public consciousness was Apollo 13, one of the most important episodes in the history of space travel. The ingenuity of the astronauts to nurse their crippled spacecraft back to Earth and survive what was likely to be a fatal experience was extraordinary and inspiring, leading, of course, to a movie and a book.
Stand by.
Fuel pumps. This is it. A few bumps and we're hauling the mail.
We are go for launch. T-minus
15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Ignition sequence start. 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
Okay, guys, we got it.
Come on, baby. Come on.
Altitude. It's on the line. Velocity right on the line.
Roll complete. We are pitching.
13, stand by for mode 1, Bravo.
Fido, how we looking?
Looks good, flight, right down the middle.
We see your BPC is clear 13.
Roger, EDS to manual. Inboard. Get ready for a little choke, fellas.
That was some little joke.
public still has the ability to be inspired by what humans can do in space. Whether it becomes a routine part of our culture and activity remains to be seen. Space is dangerous, but the reality of living in space is also mundane. A lot of the technology involved is used for mundane purposes such as keeping humans safe, alive, and dealing with their bodily functions.
You always get these questions when you go speak to schools. You know, how do you live in space? How do you sleep? How do you eat? And the most popular question of all time, guess what it is?
Probably how to go to the bathroom.
How do you go to the bathroom in space? We're going to find that out today here with Scott, is going to tell us. Okay. Right? Okay.
Well, actually, what are we doing? Do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, do you guys have, if you don't mind,
well,
do the whole thing.
Do you want to explain the practice part of this?
Yes, there's the real, we have the real toilet, and then we have the practice toilet.
We have the practice.
But Scott, were you going to get to that, or are you going to? What are you going to do?
Yeah. Scott,
I would normally skip it during the refresher, but if you want to cover it,
you have to cover it.
That's covered. You want to cover it now, or do you want to?
Oh, I'll do it now.
All right, go ahead. Do it now, Scott.
Particularly based on what you just said,
right?
Because that is our functional trainer. That one can be used.
This one over here.
That's right. That's where we're going to spend most of our time because that one can be used.
You guys are going to use that.
We could use it.
You could use it before.
We're not going to use it today.
No.
Do it in this one, I want to be upset.
No, you don't want to do it in that one because why?
This is our positional trainer. So you can see there's a TV monitor here.
There's a TV monitor there.
There's a camera inside the hole.
That's correct.
You'll notice the hole here is 4 inches.
The hole is 4 inches?
Whereas a normal toilet seat is more like 12 or 18 inches.
What's a normal? You mean like the one you have in your house?
That's right.
All right.
Alignment is important.
Right.
So the benefit of this is, if they're not confident that they have good alignment, they can come turn on the camera, or they can turn the camera off, find their alignment on the seat, flip the camera on, and see if they've...
And see over here, you can see right in the... And you can sit down on that thing and look over here and check your alignment. Now this is one... Wouldn't you say this is like the deepest, darkest secret about spaceflight? People always ask you, what about UFOs and aliens? And we got nothing for them. But they don't know about this, that we actually have a... What's the official title for it?
So much the Hubble guys
Positioning trainer. And now you're going to go over the high fidelity training.
Right. By and large, especially with more experienced crews, they've been there, done it. They just want a refresher on how to use the system. So.
Here we go. Activation.
Ta-da.
We're there. Foot, toe restraints down and locked. So
this is to support your feet while you're sitting on the potty.
Right.
You have your feet right. Support your feet.
Right. If you want to use the commode, you can put your feet or the toe restraints down at the bottom if you're just floating there. And you need to use zero.
Vacuum valve to open. Here we go. All right. Ready? Sounds good.
Unstow urinal hose from Velcro strap. Install hose and cradle.
Okay, so far we talked about your positioning aid. That was for number 2. When you go number 1,
well, that's what
you have that hose there.
Yeah, but you also have the toe strap to.
The toe strap, that's what you're saying, to hold you while you're going number 1 into the hose.
Solid waste and liquid waste go 2 different places.
Check cradles in auto. Check mode is auto.
Check mode is what
Fan step select switch to 1.
Okay, fan step switch to 1. There it goes. Okay. Press it reminds me.
Unstow hose from cradle and check for afterlight.
Good, it's working, it's sucking.
Good.
Okay, check WCS on light on.
Yep.
Stow the hose in the cradle.
Okay. On there, and this one here, and then we're going to put a little baggie in there, right? Trash bag.
All right.
This little baggie, the air can suck through the bottom of this so that whatever you throw in here sort of gets sucked down into the bottom of the bag.
Hydrophobic.
Yeah. Nice.
And we put that bag, and that's where your toilet paper is going to go. Because you don't put
hand wipes.
You don't put any paper in the bowl.
No.
Only solid waste in the bowl, and all your paper and hand wipe stuff goes in there.
That's right.
And then when you're done, you tie it up, throw it away, and put it in.
Elbow bag? Elbow bag, let's see.
Steve already pointed it out. You guys are flying all male funnels.
Yes.
But for the
Since they're all guys.
For the sake of observation here, male funnels don't have any venting. Steve already mentioned the whole unit works on air. Female crew members have 3 choices for their anatomy-based funnel choices, and they're all vented. The difference is, for women, we want their anatomy against the funnel, but we still need the airflow. For men, we do not want them docking to the funnel. To that end, also, if you're urinating and the funnel's filling with water, you need to slow down because we don't want to flood the fan separator. Did you guys use the thigh restraints at all, or just wedge yourself in here?
I stick my hand on the roof.
All right. These are thigh restraints.
They were helpful for getting in and out, actually.
As handles?
Just as handles.
You really didn't use them?
Huh? No.
You didn't use them?
No,
I just used the roof.
Yeah, but I use the thigh. I think I use the thigh restraints.
What I do is I sit where I'm comfortable.
Right.
Scooch.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right.
You know, I think of? I think of Peter Fonda in Easy Rider riding a chopper. I felt I was riding a chopper, and that's the right position for me.
You would have made a marvelous astronaut.
I would have, but it's too late now.
That's right.
And that's the benefit
I
of the
had my
mirror.
opportunity, and it didn't turn out marvelous, and now it's too
Not
late.
marvelous. That's the benefit of the mirror, is if you can't tell if something's attached to you, you can look in the mirror. So if this breaks, volume G, where your spare odor and bacteria filter are, it's underneath your aft locker, so you have to remove lockers to get to these things.
Really?
You fly adult diapers, those are standard complement. Technically they're for women, but since you don't have any on your flight, feel free to use them if you have to. This is an Apollo fecal bag, and you have a finger cot for wiping. It is an adhesive attachment.
I got a feeling I could get someone with a DC vac and that thing, I could make that work better.
Okay, any questions? You guys have done this before, so simple reminders, keep it clean, alignment's your friend, solid waste in the commode, urine goes down the tube, nothing else. If you want to come over here, the reminders are on the wall. We do leave this in a configuration, especially once you're in quarantine, that all you have to do is come over and turn on the fan sep, which you would do because you're following the procedures.
Correct.
There is the chance for it to be out of config. That this is a very popular room with tours. So what I usually start the class with is that door has a deadbolt. It has a cipher lock, it has a sign that says training in progress, and they ignore it every time. So if you're going to come in here, even if you're just doing a sim next door and you're running here to use this toilet, use the deadbolt, or you're going to have somebody's home video with you in it. Happens all the time.
Like this.
The commercial or private space industry is just emerging. No one is making any money yet. But we can see the parallel between the development of the Internet, where there was a visionary phase, incubation by the military-industrial complex, where most of the activity occurs in government labs or universities or research institutes, and eventually propagation into the private sector. If the Internet is the model, then eventually the private sector dwarfs the government sector that spawned it. And that's a healthy situation. However, it's worth noting that both in the Internet and in space travel, the government still has the ability to fund experiments and novel innovations that might not be fundable for commercial reasons.